Yeah, mic is now on. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the stream. Yeah, just a bit of a recap. So since last week's kind of more regular stream, I have been doing a few little streams in between, basically tidying things up, refactoring, keeping the functionality the same, but just changing the implementation. So. Yeah, where I'll be continuing with today is just the usual kind of language features and things like that. I'll be con I'll be potentially splitting the stream up into two halves. First hour, I'll be continuing on with the kind of mini project of converting the get Docker script to Laurel in order to kind of I suppose show the functionality of the language, but also to kind of see what other features need to be developed based on converting an actual bash script. Um, Once I've that done, kind of incoming streams, I might take a look at some of the scripts in awesome bash as well, just to get a more reprehensive, representative, not reprehensive, representative view of kind of what kind of scripts are out there, because the get Docker script will be just one type of script. The second half of today's stream, though, and I'll probably split up future streams in kind of a similar way to keep things moving on all fronts. But the second half will probably be looking at adding on specific features. Today, what I'm considering looking at is implementing strings with a byte representation. Reason for that being that we could foresee, I suppose, with the current implementation, the standard out and I suppose the internal representation of strings in Laurel uses the same representation as Rust, which I believe has to be valid UTF-8. So to relax that constraint, strings will be stored as kind of vectors of integers or bytes, and will be, will need to be converted to a string at the time of printing, but can be stored in as basically a vector of bytes. And the benefit of this is that, for example, if a if the standard output or standard error, for example, of a program, because by default, currently, I'll be looking at an approach for this language where standard output and error from processes are captured by default. So we want to avoid the case where one of these streams contains invalid UTF-8 characters, and that kind of breaks the stream as such, or breaks the script. So that's one thing I'll be looking at today in the second half. So yeah, as usual, I'm just going to get started and jump in. So people who were tuning in last Saturday previously might see a bit of a difference with the structure of the project so far. The project has been split out into kind of more modular files. So yeah, so that's one nice improvement, I think, since last time. So where we were at that at the end of the last stream, I believe I had gotten to the point of implementing command exists version GTE and calvar compare, and if I recall correctly as well, I'd actually stashed those changes while I was working on the refactoring. So I'll just take a quick look at the stash at 0, so the top of the stash. And if I take a look at, let's see, docker get, yeah, so all that stuff has been removed. So it had an implementation of calvar compare and all those kind of things. So I'll pop that off. and yeah, those are there. So if I reload that, I get these. And the main thing that was stopping me from just kind of going ahead and implementing these as is was, I believe, lack of support for some bits, if I recall correctly, but I can't actually remember what bits I didn't support. So I can see here there are things like split and map which haven't been implemented, so kind of standard library and prototype methods. Command exists. I feel like that should have been fine, but let's go ahead and uncomment that and see where we stand. So there's a token issue here with the token minus, so that should just be a matter of making that an explicit string. And with that done, yeah, so that seems all right. It's not printing download URL at the moment. Is there a reason for that? I uncommented main, because comments aren't properly supported in the language just yet. Keep forgetting that. So yeah, and that's so I'm not sure if that's problematic, but it's at least compiling at the moment. And I had these two alternative implementations of calendar version compare. I will probably use the second version. So this is the kind of more Laurel idiomatic Laurel code. This first one was probably a more direct translation of the bash script source. So yeah, I'll go ahead and try compiling that. It should compile all right, but it would give a runtime error if called. So since it's actually compiling, I wonder if I'll leave it as is for the moment and just continue on and then implement the runtime functionality when it's actually being used. So taking a look, is dry run, and that should be a matter of, so and that's another case of, do we want to access an environment variable within, or shall we say, if we're accessing environment variables, do we want to handle them all at the start of main and then pass them properly via dependency injection, or do we want to be able to kind of reach in and grab the environment from within a random function? I guess this approach is more taken in this script because it's easier. It's trickier to handle local scope and things like that, I think, in bash scripts. So this is a more pragmatic approach, but yeah, in this language, there's less of a need for it. But what I will do, so this is, in fact, if I push this over to the side, and I say is dry run, doesn't take any variables, and it's kind of the standard Go approach of checking is something set, and yeah, that compiles and runs. Well, I'm not sure does it run just yet, but it at least compiles, and the code that was written already is still running. So function is WSL. So so this is a case setup. So I don't have support for switches or pattern matching in this language at present. So what I'll probably do here is just a standard if else, and probably and in fact I probably don't even need to do a case. I suppose what this is attempting to do is work around the fact that, well, this could have used potentially grep to identify whether Microsoft is a substring. Um, with It does have to be picky about the casing though, but it's basically saying is Microsoft a substring of this command, of the output of this command. So first of all, what I'd do is we'll just call it standard out for the moment. Let standard out equal the result of uname -r, and I would want the standard out from that. And what I could do then is return contains maybe a new string method, and I would say either it contains Microsoft or contains capital M Microsoft. Yeah, that should be all right. And that should also compile but not run because contains isn't defined as a string method. So function is Darwin. Similar thing up there. So if it contains Darwin or Darwin with a capital D, then that'll be all right. And so let's try this deprecation notice. So those are parameters basically, and I can probably take this as a structured argument. So yeah, I won't be able to document this, but this will essentially be our distro, maybe name and distro version. So I'll do a print here. Now this is an interesting one because I don't have support for string interpolation, which is what I would need here. And for the moment, so just to remind myself of the components of distro, I'll do some destructuring there. I'll put a to do here and handle that later. So the idea is later, I'll implement string interpolation. I have probably a bit more to think about with that, but that should be all right. Get distribution. So this is something that I was thinking about recently. How do I handle, for example, well, actually, when I saw this, I was like, how do I handle it? But this was all right because it was just accessing an environment variable, and we already have support for that. In this case, there's a couple of things going on actually. So first of all, I can get around the fact that this is I could potentially call this directly if I did it like this. So I could call it in the same way, and I could do, it would look very strange actually. So I would have bracket or, and then etc. OS release, but this opening that is a brace or bracket. So that opening bracket is essentially kind of like a synonym for the test program. So I can just do it like this instead. What this will also require is this will require me to catch an error, because this language is going to be such that it'll be kind of like having error exit enabled by default. So whenever a program fails or returns 0, then it will kind of panic essentially, or raise an exception. So what I'll want to do here is actually catch that exception and decide on the appropriate behavior based on what the you know, what the issue was. So the way I'll do that is exceptions will be handled with a question mark. So it'll be a very lightweight kind of try catch like mechanism. So you won't be able to kind of do the standard catch specific thing and have a kind of multiple branches like that. Instead, it'll be something like this, where there's a question mark and it'll essentially catch an error, and it'll probably be very similar to go's recover in this respect, in that it just catches the issue and gives the thrown error back. So at the moment, I'll just say that those errors are strings, and the current kind of try catch mechanism will just say, if there was no error, then return null. So the error will contain null. Otherwise, the string it contains will be, or otherwise the value will be a string containing kind of a stringified description of the error. This isn't a very kind of robust or scalable error handling mechanism, but the idea, it is something that I still have to play around with, but that is kind of one of the areas where I'm going to put less focus in this language, even though I think proper error handling is hugely important. But in the likes of this kind of a scripting language, where I'm targeting scripts that are hopefully under 100 lines of code and things like that, I'm not going to be necessarily enforcing doing proper error handling where you have these kind of specific types that you can do logical matching on. I'm probably going to suggest, just simple string matching, which isn't encouraged in our languages, but for the use cases that this language is trying to accommodate, I think that's sufficient. So yeah, at least this will be kind of more of a sketch anyway. So if error is equal to null, that means there was no error, else there was an error. Now, one thing here is to potentially check, in the case of an error, if I did want to make it robust, I'd potentially want to check, is the error the specific case that test returned 0, or do I want to handle the unlikely case where test didn't exist, for example? But again, that's something that probably a more robust script would want to handle. In the case of your kind of run-of-the-mill scripts, yeah, I suppose with these kind of more glue, I suppose scripts that are being used for more glue-based purposes, just tying different things together. They do make a lot of assumptions, and I suppose a big assumption would be that the tools and programs that you're calling, you just assume they exist, and you're not going to put huge amounts of error recovery or specific, error messages to say, oh, this thing isn't installed. You're just going to assume it's installed and panic if it isn't there, just to make things kind of easier to write and more lightweight. It makes debugging trickier, but the hope is that the script as a whole is so small that hopefully debugging in itself isn't too much of an issue. So here's the first bit. So we're testing, does this, so what does or mean actually? So let me double check that. So it's bash test or. Comparison operators. Well, it's not a comparison operator, I don't think. Again, one of the things that makes shell scripting a little trickier to work with. But file has read permission. Okay, interesting. So, so if the error was null, then we'll assume file doesn't have read permission. And in this case, file has read permission. And we can put the file name in here as well. And let's see, so if it is readable, oops, so there was no error, so it has read permission. And so if it is all right, oh, hello unavailable user 5, welcome back again. So in this case, we would go LSB distribution is equal to what exactly? So I would be doing, so this is the source command. It's actually sourcing, so maybe this is a script itself. That's an interesting thing. So let me just take a look at OS released here. Oh, I'm doing well. Well, unavailable user 5. Thanks very much for asking. How are you? So, okay, yes, so it has a bunch of variables exported in it, and what this is doing is essentially hoisting it into the scope of this inner call, and then once it's available locally, it's it's essentially extracting the ID variable from this file. And that's actually quite a clever mechanism, I think. That could be used as well for the likes of .env files to easily extract variables instead of using, for example, grep or something like that. Oh, glad to hear you're doing fine. So so I could be. So what are the options here? I don't necessarily want to implement source in this language because again, that kind of assumes that this file is structured as a bash script. So, it doesn't make as much sense in this context, I think. But what I could do is call shell itself. I could perform source, or I could put it in here. And again, I would have to, interpolation would probably be nicer here, but for the moment, I will do just string concatenation. And here I would do echo ID. And so what that in theory should do is just run sh, which will source that file and then echo the ID from it. So it's more or less doing the exact same as in here. And once I have LSB distribution, then I'll be returning either an empty string, or returning an empty string here should be all right, since the case statements don't act unless you provide an actual value. Okay, so that gets caught at a different place if it doesn't work. Now that's an interesting thing. So it kind of looks like yeah, in this case, I suppose I'll take a look at where get distribution is actually being used. And it does LSB dist. There are a couple of areas where it's being used. I'll have to look at that in more detail, probably when it's actually being used, but for the moment, I'll just continue on. What I'll do is I'll output the standard out here, and I'll just return that. And so if the file wasn't readable, then I just return an empty string. And I can probably put that in there as well. So the idea of this is that we perform test, and actually I can remove the quotes around that as well. So I perform test, I check is that file readable? If it is, then we go in here. Now I am thinking as well of having a shorthand for this kind of a null comparison, so it'll be there. That's something I can get into later. What I can do, yeah, I'll probably structure it like that for the moment. I could also do the kind of idiomatic Go approach of not equals null for error handling and swap those around. For the moment, though, I'll just leave it as is. And I'll just double check that that compiles. That probably doesn't. Oh, that does compile. Do I have support for catching errors in this language at the moment? Do I have something commented? Ah, I haven't been compiling the full file for a while. So that should be down there. Let's see what happens when I compile the rest of these. So, okay, so there is some equal sign that is causing an issue. Let me see where it exists. This is quite a silly way of narrowing down the error when the compiler or the interpreter should really be telling me where the error is. But proper error handling will probably have to come in another session. So let me see. Let's try removing those. So those are all right. Maybe I don't have, okay, so I just don't have support for greater than or equal to. So that's something I need to add. Get LALRPOP up here. Oh yeah, there we go. So that's GTE and LTE. That will need to be updated in the AST. And in the eval module, so that's, I think, apply operator. Oops. And that should be that implemented. Okay, yeah, so that's compiling again. And so then the rest, I would expect an error down here as well for the question mark. Invalid token. So if I even just removed it for the time being, that should then compile. No, okay, so what's going wrong here? Is it in the deprecation notice function? Yes, so that seems to be. So what's the issue here then? Invalid token. And it's an actual invalid token rather than a parsing error. It seems like, oh, because I have double quotes. Okay, and then I should get a yeah, and if I remove the question mark there as well, I'll just put it down as a to-do handle test error exit, and I'll also need to actually implement the error exit functionality. But the problem is none of these functions are actually getting called yet from main. So maybe that's something that I should address. Yeah, so maybe I'll skip the rest of the functions as such and just put in kind of to-dos for them. And try and get to a point where I'm actually calling some of these functions. So then that will force me to actually implement them. So we have echo docker as non-root. We have check fort. And then we have actual do install, which could be the equivalent of main. I think it might be. Yeah, then at the end just it calls do install. So wrapped up in a function so that we have some protection against only getting half the file during curl pipe to sh. Yeah, that makes sense. So do install will essentially be our entry point into the program. So I'll just call that install. Does it take any parameters then? So it does an echo executing and I'll add in the script commit SHA there. And so if I, yeah, executing docker install script commit that, and let's try that. Install isn't defined. Is it just that it's defined after main? That shouldn't, oh, it's defined after main is actually called. So the problem is that main has to be called as essentially the last, it has to be called after all the other function definitions. So I can also remove that, that print statement. Okay, so we have, that's filling up the whole screen, but it's outputting, executing docker install script that commit, which is basically just coming from, oh, it's just a hard-coded string there at the moment anyway, so that's all right. So first thing to do is if command exists docker. So in the original script, that's being called using a standard kind of command syntax. Here we've, or I have updated that to just be a regular function. And so I'll be doing command exists docker. And the error I get here is not found no such file or directory. So if I jump to command exists, maybe command isn't installed in the environment where I'm running. I assume command isn't a bash built in. Oh, maybe it is. So, and if I do, so there's command usage. Let's see. No, won't be able to do it that way. What I might do instead is, similarly to above, do kind of a cheeky call here. And actually, I should have done this too, so that I'm actually calling this string as a command. And so what's happening here is I'm actually delegating this this call to shell. Okay, and so what's happening here? Oh, I think I might have a double colon at the moment for kind of concatenating or adding positional arguments or subcommands to to programs. So that's running anyway. So let me try, what's the name of the environment I'm running in there as well? So it's called confidence fence. So if I boot up a new shell in there inside confidence fence and I run docker doesn't exist, so that's all right. So what I can do then is, so what'll happen in this case, I'm expecting sh to return, in fact, that's where I'll start now. So So I'll let the result equal that, and I'll print the result. Whoops. And return it. And yeah, the exit code is 127, whereas if the command that I was checking for the existence of was something like let's see, I don't know, cat. I don't think that's a built-in. So the exit code should be 0. Yeah. So I'll check if Docker exists. That should give an exit code of 127. And so what I want to do in those situations is if I go into mod and if I go to command, so that's subcommand, is it call? No, it's defined after call spawn. Although I'll probably want to rename that at some point because to distinguish between kind of synchronous spawning and asynchronous spawning. But essentially what I want to do is here, once the command is evaluated, if it's a non-zero exit code or not a success, then I want to return an error. And this will complicate things. I'll be kind of forced to actually examine my approach to error handling soon now, because I'll be yeah, basically forcing that upon myself. But that's all right, I think. So if output status so if it's not a success, then at the moment anyway, what I'm going to do is return error, and the error will be yeah. So for the moment, I won't focus on the actual logical handling of the error. I'll just focus on getting an error produced. So and hopefully with a descriptive message. So in this case, I'll just use CMD in the description. That returned a non-zero exit code. Although I'm not actually sure of that with because I'm doing it this way. So in that case, yeah, I'll do it like this instead. Oops. Maybe I'll grab what I had before, but paste it down there. And if exit code not equals 0, now I can actually say with confidence that it wasn't there. So let's try that. Status code not found in scope. Yeah, I need to put that back in. And now the formatting there is a little uninspired, I suppose, but it'll do for the moment. So now that that's doing that, I need to have some way of actually handling the error code and performing some kind of logical handling on it. So the way I'll catch errors, as mentioned before, will be via the question mark. So let's add support for that in the parser. And this will be a very loosely binding operator. So I believe, where do the loosely binding ones? So these, the ones up here. Okay, yeah, so the further down we go, the more tightly bound we are. So multiplication happens before addition and subtraction, and then these are the ones that kind of get applied last. So in this case, and is there something above those as well? No. And those are also very tightly binding. So yeah, I'll grab that. How does that work if there's just one item in it? So there is expression, term, and factor. Surely those, where is term being used from? And then factor. I'm getting confused here by the ordering. I'll probably have to refactor that in time, and tests will definitely help catch issues with that. But for the moment, I suppose I'll just play around and see what works. So this is going to be a catch expression, and it'll have an AST production. Oh, that'll have to be boxed actually. So while that's recompiling, I'll take a look at the actual evaluation. I'm not sure if I'm going to get a conflict or a kind of an issue with generating the compiler with the way I've implemented it actually, but I'll need to handle that somewhere. So maybe down here where, oh wait, so this is returned now. So on line 625, oh yeah, so it is this section. And where did I put handling for it in the AST? I put that in, so it is eval expression, yeah, and I put handling for it above the definition for object literals, or above the handling for object literals. So I'll do catch, whoops, there we go, and catch expression, and essentially what will happen here now is, and this will be something that I need to, that I'll probably have to again consider in more detail as I go along, but at least the functionality will hopefully drive the kind of definition of this, or the use cases will drive the definition of this functionality. But let's see, so it'll be if expression is, so first of all I'm going to eval the expression, and then I'll do a match on it, and I'm actually not going to use the question mark here. In this case, I'm going to use, so there'll be, yeah, match maybe value. And in the case where it was okay, I can just return the okay value as is. Well, maybe I won't be able to actually. That's something I'll need to consider. But in the case of an error, then I will catch the error. I'll replace, yeah, so in this case, what I'll probably have to do is, for the moment, and again, this is something that I'll probably refactor in time, but I'll do something similar to what I do in the iteration. So in iteration, I go values to pairs, and I create a new list. Oh yeah, value new list. So what I'll do here is I'll go okay, value new list, and that will be a vector of, well, actually, I'll do the pair there so that I can do the new list down here just once. And that'll be v and maybe error. Yeah, I'd like to give those two different names maybe to distinguish them, but I'm not sure what would be a good way of distinguishing them. Anyway, for the moment, I'll have v here, and I'll have value new null for the error. Yeah, and that's all right like that. Otherwise, I'll have new null here, but the error will be value new string, and it'll be e2 string or something. I'll see how best to represent that. But then once those are converted like that, that should be all right. Line 872, what's going wrong there? Not found in scope yet, so I need to evaluate the expression, or the AST expression anyway. That's an old, oh yeah, and then 271 is just, yeah, all this stuff. So catch can't bind to a catch. Okay, and toString just seems to just work, so that's all right. So now the functionality should be there in theory, but let's see what happens when I run it. So when I run it now, yes. So so the processing now isn't terminated. but what I get back is a list that I can then decompose on or destructure on. And I can see was there an error or not. And in this case, I can do return, well, I'll say I don't actually need the result here. Instead, I'll check whether error is equal to null or not. Invalid types. Okay, so strings can't be compared to null. So null can only be compared with other nulls. So that, yeah, that's an interesting one. I'd probably have to research that a bit more, because in other languages, I have noticed that the likes of null is kind of given special attention. So in the likes of Python, it seems to be a better practice to not use equals with null. Instead, you should use equals with or when you're using none, you should use the is keyword. I'm not actually fully certain of the reason behind that. I think I'm going to go with allowing nulls to be compared with anything, basically. But it is something that I probably need to look into at some point as well. So if I go down to the research section, so investigate equals with null. Is there a need for is? And I'm not sure if that's to do with, say, in Python, none be like where none is actually a value as well as, well, I'm not sure if it's a value as well as a type, or there's a distinct type and value both called none, and you use is to check the type and you use equals to check the value. That would probably make sense to me. But again, that's not something that I'm going to spend too much time on here. I'm basically just going to say, if the value is null and the right hand side is something, and I'll also need a complementary match down here, doing the same. And then I match the operation. If the operation is equality, and I'll do something like is null, and I'll just take a value and return that. We'll just do a match. Do I need to do a match? Maybe an if let, actually. If let value null. In fact, I'm not even doing a pattern match, so I could probably do value bool right hand side is value null. Let's try that for the moment. I'll comment out those other bits. Whoops. And see what we have so far. So yeah, it doesn't implement partial equality. So I suppose my options here are to derive partial equality or define is null using pattern matching. So maybe I'll try the latter. So can I do it like that? If not, then okay, so that seems to kind of a funny one because it's not actually extracting any data from the pattern match. But let's try that. Is null if the right hand side is null. Yeah, that seems to work in theory anyway, and we'll implement not equals. Oops. And same for the right hand side, and that'll be compared to the left hand side value. So result isn't defined. Yeah, so that's okay. So I printed out the value, and is error equal to null, and it's false because it returned an error. We assume it returned an error because it returns non-zero. So in that case, we return error equals null, and that would be true if that was fine. So jumping back here, if we print the result of command exists Docker, we should get false here. Excuse me. Yeah, because Docker doesn't exist. Okay, so that's that was a couple of things implemented there. So what I'll do is I'll get rid of the stuff that isn't kind of being used or isn't relevant. And I'll commit that implementation of both catch and I think, well, actually, I'll implement greater than and equal to and less than or equal to first. So git restore. Oh, that's new. Can I still do git reset head? Okay, yeah. Definitely clearer, but a little bit more verbose somewhat. Maybe I could alias git on stage and do the same thing. Anyway, getting sidetracked. So yeah, greater than or equal to all those. No, not needed. Yeah. No. Yeah. No. There we go. So and now I'll unstage that again. So maybe I will add that as an alias to my git config. So And so what was it called? Restore unstage, or no, restore staged. And if I do git status, git on stage, and source, cool. And so I won't commit catch first. I won't implement those, but I will add the functionality where it exits on non-zero. Use errexit functionality, or impose, or yeah, I suppose just set by default. And add support for catching errors. And now one thing that does as well is that doesn't, this new mechanism for catching errors will just allow you to catch any error, including errors that to a certain extent you shouldn't be allowed to catch, such as syntax errors or things like that. Again, the ramifications of this are something that I need to investigate further as well, but for the moment it's at least functional and can be used to, write a full script at least. So yeah, where are we? Branches clean, so I'll push those. And next, next bit of script. So so we have, if the command Docker already exists, basically, output, a thing to say that, oh, it shouldn't be like this. So we'll go if command exists, and it outputs it to standard error as well. I won't add support for that just now, but that'll be something to keep in mind for later. Multi-line strings is something that I'll probably just want to support by default. I think the current strings might actually be multi-line by default as it stands. I can probably check that by going print hello world. Okay, interesting. So the new lines do. So multi-line strings are supported, but it does seem like the new lines get eaten by the scanner, I guess, or Lexer. So that's something to address at some point as well. So, and what's this doing here? So from this point on, okay, so this script actually doesn't set error exit by default, possibly because of this function, but it does it from this point. Does it? Or what's it doing here exactly? Oh no, because it's only within the confines of this subshell. Maybe it's so that if, well, I'm not really sure why it's doing like that. If anyone watching the stream knows why it's doing that, I'd be very curious to hear the answer. Maybe does this script, I assume, have an associated Docker repository or a Git repository? Yeah, and here's install, and if I find so okay, so it's called blame in Git. There might be a reason for that. Oh no, that was the one prior to it. And so, is there a bit of a description as to why? Why setx is being used the way it's being used? No, it's not very clear to me, but it seems to be used in a couple of different places in the same way, so it seems like there is a reason for it. I'm just not sure what it is. So yeah, I suppose that's something to do as well at some point is handle that kind of sleeping mechanism. So if I go print and I'll just do to do here. And now the next bit, oh, I just realized, so I've gone past the hour. So I'll probably bring the script refactoring to a close around or about now. I might just kind of finish off this last command, but once I've done that, then I'll probably continue on with actually implementing more features. So let's see. So the user is id-un. We route the standard out to dev null, and we say that okay, if it failed, then return true. So what we'll do instead, it'll be similar enough. We don't have to do the routing to dev null because we can just grab standard out as is. We'll use id. The parameters to that will be un. I'll use a quote to so that's basically saying if it fails, what would the standard out be if it failed? The standard out would just be empty. So what I would want to do in that case is have error there and say if error is populated, then I set user to be the empty string. And so then if I try printing user there, oh yeah, because the user doesn't exist in this environment. So if I do idun, cannot find name for that user. Yeah, so if I did echo that, yeah, it's not returning. So that's actually having empty string for that is actually correct in that instance. So that's where are we now in relation to the script? So it's about halfway down. So having said that, I have skipped a bit that'll have to be done later. But having the try catch mechanism in place will be very useful and hopefully make the rest of the script conversion more straightforward. And having some, shall we say, live examples of the usage of this error handling mechanism will hopefully allow me to identify patterns, maybe see where some syntactic sugar can be applied. So one thing I was thinking is, as a shorthand for this, I could have, dot question mark, and it would kind of say, if if an error is null, I'd probably have to pair it with that. Or if error is not null, I don't know, something like that. But there's plenty of opportunities for, like I say, syntactic sugar, based on that, and based on having actual kind of an actual demonstration of the code being used. So with that all said, what will I work on next? So what I'll do for the moment is, yeah, I'll take a look at the to-do list. I think the thing that I was going to work on was strings with byte representation, because that should, in theory, be kind of straightforward enough. So what I'll do is I'll make a backup of the Docker get script. I'll remove the existing implementation, and I will, let's see, I'll just open the to-do list down here as well. So first of all, I want indexing. And one of the reasons for that byte representation as well is it makes some of these bits, I suppose, just a bit more intuitive. Like Rust and Go are very nice in that when you're doing indexing, you're indexing valid kind of Unicode code points rather than doing kind of more simplistic byte indexing, or yeah, I suppose byte indexing. However, in this language, again, it's not going to be used for such robust applications. You're not going to be doing, I would say, mad UTF-8 string manipulation, things like that. So um, just having the implementation and interpretation be basically as simple as possible. Yeah, I'll be using a byte representation for strings. So let me do up some example code maybe, and then I can kind of implement the code. So if I do this, I'll get a runtime error because it can only index lists and objects. So that's the first thing to rectify. And as almost a prerequisite of that, I'll say that strings are implemented as a vector of i8s. And so what am I going to have to change to support that? So a number of areas are going to have to be updated. So let's see. So first of all, new valref, or no, sorry, 148, creating a new string that will need to take a vector of i8. And in fact, maybe well, I can't create a new string type. But I potentially can if I don't have the names colliding. Or maybe if I call it capital S stir. I'll try that. 30 errors now. Um, so let's see. Probably caused by, yeah, so there's so I'll probably need to implement maybe a helper function uh, to help kind of convert between things. So if I implement that, what would I need to do to convert it to a vector of i8s? Into bytes maybe? Oh no, so they're not i8s, they're u8s. And it would need to be, so it's a vector of u8 global. That looks very odd to me. The fact that there are two generic types. Oh, it's a lifetime thing, maybe. The global memory allocator. Yeah, I suppose the thing to take away is that this probably just acts as a regular vector of u8s. So yeah, so it should be all right. And what was it called again? Into bytes. So let's try that. And so we'll start off with main, and we'll find instances of new string. We'll try that. Yeah, that seemed to have resolved a bunch of those. 1, 2, 3, 9. What's going on here? So that is trying to add two vectors. Not sure what the best approach is there. There's probably a good way of concatenating the two. So that'll be from string as well. Although that was actually, so before I was actually converting the output to UTF-8 already to the kind of Rust string format. But now what I can probably do is actually put the values in directly. Let's try that. I wonder if I'll still need to borrow them. Well, I've reduced the number of errors anyway, so that bodes well. Match arms have incompatible types. So 1088. Oh, so expected those vectors, but found strings. That's a bit of a tricky one, so I might leave that for the moment. Let's see, 898. insert expected a string but found a vector. So in that case, yeah, that's an interesting point in terms of the storage of um, objects and hash map values. Yeah, it would be ideal to keep those two consistent. I could have hash maps mapping from vectors of U8s to the desired values. Yeah, again, another thing I'll probably leave for the moment if I can. 877. So that's new string. That'll be a new string from a string. So that's the piece that I introduced recently. New command 859. So program at the moment is coming from because it's coming from a string, it's being it's causing an issue. So in this case, it kind of depends on whether so if I create a new command, I'll just see if I can so let me see, Rust command. Let's try this. So I'll print CMD first. Yeah, and that's fine. And then if I define command in terms of, let's see, and if I make that, oops, based on U8s, I wonder can I use characters here to define the values. No, expected a U8. So let's see, ASCII table maybe. I probably have to, yeah. So if I go, I don't really need to be so pernickety, but 68 and 69. Try running that. Yeah, as ref OS string isn't implemented for that. So maybe look up OS string and new. And what can be coursed. So I assume it'll be the same result if I do OS string new. trait bound not satisfied. Yeah, that's probably what I was saying a minute ago as well. So that trait bound isn't implemented. So what I'll probably do is have command be based on, let's see, instead of being based on strings. And what other things are based on strings actually? Just commands, it seems like, and also objects. So for the moment, I suppose when I'm issuing new command or creating new commands, I'll just convert from a raw string to, or bytes to a string. So let's see. So that was 859. In this case, let's try that. And 21 errors, so I think I got rid of an error anyway. And try using a conversion method to vec. Oh, because it was a reference and it can't be. Okay, or do I need to clone it? Not sure. 754. Property name not found. Yeah, that'll be one issue, is converting byte strings to regular strings in the case of weird values. Yeah. Will lookups be allowed with non-UTF-8 strings? Yeah, for the moment, probably not. So so that'll be raw name and similar to there. I'll do this conversion. Can be used to perform key lookups on objects. That should handle a few. Yeah, so that seems to have handled 2 issues there. 753 expected a reference but got a string. Um, 615 probably a similar issue. Yeah, binding to the global scope or to scopes in general. Now that's an interesting one. So this is okay, yeah. Actually, this is the same as before. So this is the case of object binding. Oops, what happened there? 14 errors, getting through them. Kind of slow progress, but still they're being whittled away. So, oh yes, so this will be string from string. That should be all right. 578. So that's another kind of instance of this. Whoops, what happened there? That doesn't implement display. I think that's what I was just working on. Line 311. Again, dealing with objects. So 16, and that would be what's happening there? Yeah, so it's an error. Oh yeah, so that's a panic. And so I need to convert from a string into, oh no, sorry, from, yeah, same thing, from bytes into a string. Line 53, yeah, this would be an important one as well. So at the moment, print can only be done with kind of regular strings. Oh, that you shouldn't be able to return an error. So I'll have to update that. Okay, I'll leave that for a minute. Line 121, new string from string, I think. Yeah. Prototypes, line 54. I think that'll be a new string. That's an interesting one now. I might at some point implement some of the standard library definitions in terms of Laurel itself for simplicity, though it could have an effect on the performance. But again, being very fast isn't necessarily the objective of this language. So slice pattern isn't implemented for vector of U8. So I suppose the question then is, can strip prefix be called on can strip prefix be called on non-UTF-8 strings? I wouldn't see why not. It seems like that kind of makes sense to me. But how to implement that then? One approach could be to actually adjust the current implementation so that we get the so let's see. So first of all, we could have so let len equals prefix, the length of the prefix, and if the length of the prefix is greater than the length of the unstripped string, then we return the empty string. Otherwise, we get the first we try and get the same length of characters from the unstripped value, if the maybe prefix is equal to the actual prefix, then we return, in theory, a new string made from unstripped from length, and otherwise we return just the unstripped value. So let's try that. Does that alternative implementation work? I'm not sure. I'll have to get through these other errors first to find that out, and it looks like it doesn't work, but I shall visit that shortly. I suppose I'll go back now and check out some of the more problematic issues from this file. So this again, I think, is just a matter of, now that could be an issue because that changes that from a simple mapping function to a mapping function that can fail. Yeah, that is also a tricky one. That's 238,936. Let's see, insert. That's an object issue as well. So that might be all right. So let k going back to this command piece now. Same situation. Consider whether non-UTF-8 strings can be used as program or for program names. And in this case, it's prog, I believe. Yeah, so I'll do raw program. Where are we now? That was, wait, line 1121. That was, so both of those, so that also needed to be converted. And that is couldn't convert program argument to UTF-8. So still 10 errors. Let's see. Issue, what's the bottommost issue there? So that's yeah, concatenating strings So for this one, let's see what would happen if I just removed that. What did it say up there at the top? Oh, that's a syntax error. Cannot add those two. Let's see. I always have issues with concatenation in Rust. I think the simplest way generally is to have a vector of vectors, and then you can just collapse all of them, isn't it? So that's for string literals, or not necessarily string literals, but general literals. And it's in the standard library. That's all right. But so append, and that actually mutates the sources. I don't think I want to mutate them. They're immutably borrowed anyway, I think. So I don't think that would be a runner anyway. There's extend. Maybe I'll just look up the standard library. I think one way is so if I have concat. Okay, so yeah, that would be one way to have a vector of vectors and concatenate all of them. So maybe that and those don't need to be mutable, so they I would assume get cloned. Although I wonder so self, and it takes items where they can be concatenated. Not really sure the how to read the type of that function in that case, but anyway, so if I go like this and concat, let's try that anyway for starters. Method can't be called on it due to unsatisfied trait bounds. I guess because they're not concatenable, if that's a word. Maybe my best bet is to actually just do the kind of manual approach. So let vector let a is equal to LHS clone, let b is equal to, and that's mutable, RH, so that's a extend RHS, and then let's see, Let's try that. So yeah, that seems to have done it. And I'll just modify the styling there to account for the fact that it's been updated. So we're at least under 10 errors now. This is another instance of program arguments. Of course, as I'm doing all this, I'm also introducing future kind of refactoring work for myself. But as I've said before, at least I'm getting the thing working, and then with the, I suppose, extra headspace, I can actually examine the kind of best way of refactoring this stuff in isolation. So hopefully not too big of a deal. So that seems to be mod just about taken care of. I have some new errors introduced in prototype from my rewriting of the of that unstrip or that strip prefix function. So let's take a look at what is going wrong here. So line 56. Is that built in? Oh no, that's built in functions, line 56. Oh yeah, and that was because that function doesn't currently return errors. I shall address that shortly, I hope. Yeah, that's a straightforward enough one. I was half thinking that would be the case. 58 doesn't have a size known at compile time, so I probably have to, put the reference there. Line 60, similar deal, I think. Well, I'll probably have to convert that to a vector. I wonder, can I do that just on the raw? Well, that's probably not a slice yet until I apply another function to it, is it? Oh no, I can actually do it like that. Interesting. So I probably have to do the same there. I don't know, what was the issue I was getting there? Was that the same, doesn't have a size known it? Oh no, that was, yeah, that was just mismatched types. Due to it being a reference instead. I could probably, instead of that, no, I'll just leave it the way it is for the moment and not introduce any more hardship. So down to 2 errors. So let's see. line 56 in functions, and yeah, so these are these are the tricky ones that I've left for last. So let's see, 56, this should be a matter of changing that to result, or yeah, result with a string error, and that'll be adapted to OK. But up here we'll have return error, and so then whatever calls render will also need to be able to handle that. And I suppose I'll put a question mark there to automatically handle the error. Oops, what's going wrong here now? Can't be formatted with the default formatter. Line 72. Oh, because it's yeah. How about that? All right, and mod is also not using string anymore, it seems. And 238, well, 237 now. Yeah, this will be a tricky one. What's my best bet here? Well, first of all, I'll wrap these in blocks now. And let's see, so I can't use return easily in here because this is within a closure, so it'll only return from the closure function. Let's see, I suppose a for loop would probably make the most sense actually. So for prop in props iter, and I'll create pairs, and then I'll return pairs at the end. And for key and value, in that, and I'll also need, so this is where I'll need my UTF-8 conversion. On keys, wait, hang on, what was the issue I was getting before? It was probably the opposite actually, was it? So the maybe I couldn't convert the key to a string. Let me just revisit that. Expected a struct vector. So in this case, I could probably, so if I have Rust string, and I do into bytes, that doesn't fail. In fact, if I just do a new string from string, oh, that's all that was. Nice one. So that's the first bit of that done anyway. And so indexing. So index or can only index lists and objects. We're going to update that and strings. So that strings can be indexed as well. So evaluate location, that has to be an integer. If it's a safe lookup, then it'll handle any issues properly. Otherwise, does string have a get method? Yeah, so I suppose it works the same as a list. Maybe it's very similar to that. It's just that the result that gets returned will need to be converted. So I'll be getting an integer, an unsigned 8-bit integer from these calls, so they'll need to be converted. So instead of line 719, I'll need to do a value new string, and it'll be a vector consisting of v. I think I can just copy that value. Same down there. Value new string or new stir. Cool. So that's string indexing implemented. So I'll just make a copy of that to the test directory. Or is it the examples? Yeah. And yeah, so I'll make a commit of that. right, and then add examples, commit that, and update string or stir representation to use vector of U8. And then next thing I want to do is, let's see, string ranges. So if I did 0 to 5 and 5 to 10, for example, or let's see, 6 to 10. Well, first of all, it's going to get an error because it can only index range lists at the moment. Whereas now, I'm going to say that it's also allowed for strings. So similarly to above, this should be possible to keep a good chunk of this intact. But I'll have to update that to get string index range and get list index range. Okay, and let's see what needs to change here now as well. I suppose let's try just compiling that and seeing what goes wrong. So stir isn't implemented or isn't imported here. So let's grab that. 864. Expected a vector. Oh yeah, so we'll grab a reference to one instead. 1300. Yeah, local variables. 1303. Where's V's coming from? Oh yeah, some V's. And in that case, I need to, oh yeah, so that's the new list. That should be a new string. And cool. So that's shopping off. Yeah. So that's all right. I must actually check that my refactoring of strip prefix is still working as expected. So if I say hello and I print h strip prefix HEL, will I get low back? Yeah. Okay. So that seems to be working still as well. So that's range indexing working for strings. Oh, and I will copy that to examples again. Test string indexing. Yeah, overwrite it. Cool. And commit that. Add index ranges for strings. And then, what was the last bit in the to-do list? Let's see. Indexing, range indexing, and iteration. So, in fact, I'll rename that to just test strings. And the bit here was to say for index and character in what's it called? So hello world. I could print INC. And a little hyphen in the middle just to show the destructuring working. But if I run that first, it'll say, iterator must be that. And so now that this piece has been kind of abstracted relatively nicely, I can hopefully handle it like this. So new string, this will be a vector. I'll probably have to dereference that. Oh no, sorry, I'll leave that as is. Won't be able to use value clone. Instead, I'll have to do a value new string. And that will be value, no, that will be, yeah, vector of C. And I assume I'll have to dereference that. Yeah. And that is then working as expected. So each character of Hello World paired with its index. So nice. Again, that was kind of more of a primitive, functionality just to flesh out the basics of the language, but still nice to actually have it implemented finally. So I'll add all that. And so that will be add add string iteration. So nice one. Git push. Nice. So there was, yeah, fair bit implemented today. Converting the representation for strings took probably a little longer than I expected, but again, thankfully that's out of the way. Got a good chunk of this Docker script converted as well, getting into kind of more meatier parts of it, and it also involved finally getting started with the kind of error handling mechanism for this language, and the error catching mechanism, so that scripts will fail by default on program failure, but then recovering from that is relatively trivial, uh, probably a bit more verbose than it could be or perhaps ought to be, but that's again something that I'd like to resolve based on actual use cases rather than kind of guessing or coming up with some mechanism for handling them without actual data or statistics to back it up. So yeah, I'm basically going to be leaving it there. As usual, thanks very much to everyone who is checking out the stream, and I'll see everyone next week. So take care. Thanks.